please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hi, very good afternoon. Important news which is breaking on your screen with regards to source-based information at this point in time. The government is probably not going to go ahead with the Air India divestment. The government will provide required funds for Air India's operations. So this is the piece of news which is coming in. It is put on a back burner and it is not a good time to privatize Air India. I think, Prashant, this was, I think, a logical course of events based on the bidding which had come through for Air India, or rather the lack of bidding and the lack of interest that we had seen for Air India.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not something that the government wanted. I mean, the government, of course, wanted to sell. But since there were no takers, I mean, there's no other option but to put it off. I mean, that's essentially as plain and simple as you can put it. And I think Indigo, the stock came up on your screen. It's seeing a bit of a spike. I think, what, about 0.13%. But from the lows, it's come up. I think the low today was about 12.31. It's at about 12.43. So about 12-13 rupees higher, I think, based on that news flow. But, I mean, the fact also is that, you know, in the current form, in the form that Air India was put up on the block I mean, there was no real interest from anyone, including Indigo. Of course, I mean, this would mean that with the government not deciding to go ahead with the stake sale as of now, I mean, there is no future bid which is going to come through from Indigo or anybody for that matter, at least for now. We'll try and get Ashpreet, who follows the sector closely. He's been in touch with government officials, etc.
Interestingly, I don't know why Indigo should probably see a relief rally, because on the 31st of May, the expression of interest had to be submitted, and there was not one EOI which had come through, I think, for Air India. So I think Indigo had shown their displeasure in bidding for Air India in any case at that point in time. So maybe this is just a little bit of a breather for the breather which is coming. It would be charitable and say that
to explain the move, you could just say that maybe now it's not as if the government is going to come up with another proposal to sell in some other form, and at that point they may be a bid. I mean, now it's clearly saying that you know, it's been put off, right? I mean, they're not going to try and sell after the experience that they've had. So I think it's a feeble, small reaction. I mean, it's not much at all.
Exactly. And there are some more statements coming in where the rise in fuel prices is probably one of the key reasons for the lack of interest in Air India. So that's one of the statements which are coming in from the government sources, and they will work to bring, they will look at cost cutting and asset monetization for Air India at this point in time. So I don't think that fuel prices or rising fuel prices was probably the only concern for Air India. Obviously, you're dealing with, you know, the whole fleet, and separately you're dealing with a very strong union as well when it comes to Air India.
A lot of debt, right? But you know, this is government's version which is coming through. So you got to sort of read it as that. So other lines which are, okay, I think we've got Shireen, who's also been following the story very closely, joining in now. I mean, so Shireen, I mean, first attempted big ticket divestment being put off. I mean, what would you make of it?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think this is entirely unexpected, Prashant, because remember, the deadline for the expressions of interest were extended, and despite that, the government got no EOI from anybody, whether a domestic carrier, an Indian conglomerate, or a foreign carrier. And so it's prudent on the part of the government to sort of put this off for now. And anyway, you know, we're heading into an election year, and it looks highly unlikely that we are going to see any big ticket divestment go through. On this issue particularly, the suggestion was that the Niti Aayog was coming up with new recommendations in terms of how Air India could be taken forward. The idea of an IPO was being floated. But, you know, experts that we were speaking to were confused about what the point was of doing an IPO and why would somebody take Air India public at this point in time. It's a loss-making company. It continues to be a loss-making company. So what was the rationale for considering the IPO route? That wasn't flying with most experts that we spoke with. And yesterday, as we had reported, there was a meeting that had taken place with Arun Jaitley. At the helm of that meeting, Piyush Goyal, Nitin Gadkari, Suresh Prabhu, and the bureaucrats involved also attended that meeting. So clearly a decision has been taken now to put off the stake sale, which really wasn't going anywhere. Remember, Indigo had already pressed its interest. It had put in an unsolicited expression of interest, but it was mostly interested in the international operations, not in the domestic operations. So it never, then revived its interest after the terms were put out in the market. No other domestic carrier showed any interest. There were some queries that the government says it got from foreign carriers, etc., but not a single expression of interest. And that's the end of the story now as far as the Air India disinvestment is concerned, at least under the tenure of this particular government. Again, what they're now attempting to do is cost-cutting measures which have already been put in place, we understand. Further cost-cutting measures will probably be taken forward, and also the possibility of bringing in people from the private sector. So lateral entrance, perhaps, even when it comes to Air India. And again, this is not an experiment that hasn't been tried in the past. It is something that has been done in the past as well, both for Air India as well as Indian Airlines. So we'll just have to see how this plays out. But, the potential, especially on the international routes that Air India has, is immense. If they can just get the operations in order, if they can operate Air India as a commercial airline as opposed to, having to sort of weigh it down with legacy as well as bureaucratic issues, this would be a different story altogether. The international operations certainly have very viable routes, direct flights. They enjoy some of the best bilateral rights. So no reason for Air India to be losing market share, especially when it comes to the international operations, which is what, we reported here a few days ago. Ashpreet had done that story as well. So for now, it's the end of the road as far as the Air India strategic disinvestment is concerned.
All right, Shireen, thanks very much for that. So just to reiterate, the Air India divestment plan by the government is off. And remember, they have around 50,000 crores in debt. They have over 20,000 crores in terms of accumulated losses. So they come with a heavy balance sheet. But let's get in a reaction now. We have Anshuman Deb of ICICI Securities who joins in on the phone line to discuss this. Anshuman, from a listed stock point of view, it's only Indigo that was interested in Air India. So it's a bit of a relief rally, or maybe a little bit of an uptick that we're seeing at this point. Are you glad that a company such as Interglobe is probably not going ahead with an Air India and it's off the table now?
Yeah, so Indigo has have made it quite clear, I think, quite some time back that they were not interested in Air India in the present avatar, in the way the government was doing it. As far as Air India is concerned, it's more to do with it's more to do with the state of the Indian airlines, as in none of the airlines are capitalized enough to take Air India in its present form. So you have to look at it in a form where it is broken down into maybe international or domestic or asset-wise, so that it becomes within the ability of Indian airlines. As far as the listed players is concerned, apart from Indigo, most of them are in a severely undercapitalized state to take Air India, and even for Indigo, it's quite a long stretch. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the Air India's acquisition divestment has been put on back burner. The government needs to rework the model, and then there will be surely some takers for the international routes as well as domestic routes, but in a different way than that they have devised in the present model.
Anshuman, Air India continues to lose market share. I mean, on foreign routes, local routes, I mean, you compare those numbers from what they were a year ago, and they're down. In your opinion, with this now having been put off for now, can the government, is it going to be a holding operation according to you, or can they really do something with the airline?
So you're right in the sense that with every passing time, the proposition of divesting Air India becomes even tougher. Even global airlines like Alitalia and Air Berlin have faced the similar issues when sovereign airlines have been tried to be divested. But government, I think it's difficult to remodel the company to a profitable form with the debt on its book. So, even if it gets a good margin turnaround and everything, you will have a huge amount of interest component which will take away all the profits. So it will keep on continuing to be a loss making airline considering the debt burden that it has. So without that, without the debt restructuring, I don't see any kind of reversal in fortunes. But profitability improvement can definitely happen, and part of it has already happened in the last 3 years. We have seen some margin improvements happening, but considering the debt burden that it has, and considering the industry which does not support a very high debt kind of a structure, it's very difficult in the long run.
Okay, Dheeraj Mathur of PwC is also joining into this conversation. Dheeraj, do you think that maybe the government should probably try and re-explore the divestment of Air India by, say, breaking it up asset-wise or route-wise, or, whichever way, and like a piecemeal kind of structure, something that Anshuman had mentioned just a few minutes ago?
Well, actually, there are two things. One is that obviously whatever has to be done now will be done after the elections, because there is just no time. Nobody's going to take this political risk at this point of time. So the first thing that the government has to do is certainly keep the airlines afloat. And for that, there was a financial restructuring plan which involved pumping in about 40,000 crores of equity. That is something that the government will have to take on and continue with, because, of those, to deal with that huge debt burden and the losses. Now, as far as the restructuring, the divestment is concerned, what the government really needs to do is look at the 160 odd questions that they got in response to the PIN. Because people have expressed their apprehensions and concerns in those. Look at those questions and see what restructuring is possible. And they need to also get into conversations with those entities that had expressed an interest in the divestment, and see what are their genuine concerns, and then look at tweaking. Obviously, there will have to be a restructuring of the package. But that has to be done, sort of systematically. Look at the issues that were raised and get back into a conversation with the potential buyers and address their apprehensions, and then come out with a restructured package. And all this will take time, and I guess that it will have to happen after the next government is formed.
Yeah, I think at least till May of next year. Beyond that, Dheeraj and Anshuman, thanks very much, both of you, for being with us here and taking us through what you make of this. We are going to take a very quick break for now, with news that the Nifty is down about 71, 72 odd points. So the low was 10,708. There was a bit of an attempt at a recovery, but we are going down again, 10,729. So there's what, about 15 points between where we are now and the day's lows level. We take a very quick break, the first on the show. We come back, and of course the big focus remains what's happening in global markets on the back of fears of that trade spat between the US and China. We're back with that in 2 minutes.
Well, let's touch a little bit upon the markets. We have the Midcap index, which is down around 1.2%, and the Nifty itself, which is just about hovering at around 10,730, down 68 odd points. Remember, it's been a weak global screen for us all day. So, for example, Shanghai down 3.8%, Hang Seng down around 840 odd points. So, it's been largely a weak global session. Compared to that, we're not that bad. But to talk more about the technicals of the market, we have Sandeep Wagle joining in. Sandeep, hi, over to you then. What are you recommending on the Nifty, and what would your stocks be?
Afternoon, Ekta. I think there has been some kind of a selling at higher levels, and I would recommend selling the Nifty maybe on a bounce around 750, 760 for a target of around 680 or so. That 50-70 points is what I see for the day. Stock specific, I have one sell call and one buy call. A sell in a Jindal Steel, stop loss of 225, target of 210, and a buy in a GAIL, Gas Authority of India, stop loss 338, target 351.
Sandeep, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you joining in with those trading ideas. We'll have more as the day goes along. 70 points lower on the Nifty. We've got Nick Parsons now joining in. Remember, Asian stock markets are lower. Most Asian emerging market currencies are lower. Of course, safe haven currencies like the Japanese yen are doing better. But otherwise, I mean, everything, all asset markets under pressure. Nick Parsons, Head of Research and Strategy at Thomas Lloyd, is now with us on the phone line. Nick, thank you for your time. Good to have you here. So Trump is threatening new tariffs on about $200 billion worth of Chinese goods which come into the U.S. We can debate about whether it will happen or not. So far, Mr. Trump has done what he said he will. Assuming that this also goes through, what are the ways that China will respond in? I mean, is it going to be sort of, tariffs? Or are there other ways China can react to this one?
Well, good morning from London, first of all. There's several ways in which China can retaliate. Let's bear in mind that the United States only exports around $170 billion of goods to China. So although if China were to retaliate with 10% tariffs, then that wouldn't take us to equivalence of 200 billion, which Trump is targeting. So theoretically, it could put a higher rate than 10% on this 170 billion. But of course, that would risk some escalation. One of the other options it has is it could directly target US firms operating in China and make life somewhat more difficult for them, whether that's administratively, legally, and so on and so forth. So it could take direct action against the way in which firms operate in the country, or under the rules of global trading, it could actually impose tariffs of greater than 10% because the US simply doesn't export enough goods and services to China.
Mm-hmm. Nick, hi. Thanks very much for joining in. We started off the year with very bullish estimates on gold. Some were projecting maybe even over $1,400 that we could see this year. But that hasn't yet culminated. Do you think that the kind of risk-off that we could see would now probably result in renewed interest in gold?
It's a very good question, and personally, I don't think so at the moment. And the reason for that is that gold can be thought of as the anti-dollar. Now, remember, at the start of this year, the dollar's trend was towards weakness, and in that trend, gold, precious metals, and the commodity complex generally does quite well. But of course, over the last 2.5 to 3 months, we have seen the dollar rally. The dollar index is back up towards 95. We've got the euro down at a 115 big figure. We have the British pound down at 132. And so as the dollar is doing very well, then so too the anti-dollar commodities are doing poorly. And so I think that's a relationship which is likely to continue over the next few months. One of the things which is causing tensions within the emerging markets universe is in fact the strength of the US dollar, which is leading to higher imported inflation and has prompted central bank reactions in India and elsewhere. Now, I think the dollar can carry on rallying from here and continue to weigh on gold unless and until President Trump sends a tweet from his bedside one morning and says the dollar has gone far enough, the dollar is expensive, we want a weaker dollar. So unless and until we see President Trump tweeting that, then the dollar is going to remain bid and gold is going to remain under pressure.
Since we have you with us, Nick, I mean, any thoughts on oil ahead of that OPEC meeting? I mean, lots of reports about how much they're going to increase production by. There was one report yesterday which put the number, well short of what others were saying, and I think it saw a bit of prices saw a bit of a spike. But your sense?
Well, WTI crude this morning is trading at $65.15. Back in late May, we got to a high of 72.50. and in early March, you may recall, we were just over $60. So it does seem as though 60-70 is a fair range. We're towards the middle of it. It's a level at which we're not hearing of any pain from the producers. We're certainly not seeing those howls of anguish from central bankers facing incessant price rises of imported energy, which has begun to feed through into CPI measures, both in developed markets and across the emerging markets. So I would suggest that at or around current levels is something that everyone globally can live with. Just because we can live with it, of course, doesn't guarantee we're going to settle here, but it does seem that the mid-60s is an equilibrium level at which both producers and consumers are bearing equal pain. So I think it's around fair value at the moment.
Nick, thank you very much. Appreciate you joining in. Good speaking with you, and appreciate your time as always here on CNBC. 65 on the Nifty, so 10,734. I mean, we've got some flashes at the bottom of the screen. PNB Housing Finance is going to consider raising funds via NCDs on the 26th of June. Which is the news which is hitting the wires right now. We've also had flagged off ICICI Bank, and maybe we should put the intraday up. So I think that is seeing a bit of recovery from the lows. ICICI Bank high was 295, low was 288, and it's basically going back to the high point of the day, 292 or so at this point in time. We take a very quick break here. We'll come right back where there's more coming up on the markets.